Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, for you anyway, Monday, April 10th, 2017. This would be now, I believe, start of week 12 of The Presidential Apprentice. This despite the fact that the president apparently thought that this would be, I guess, week 14. He was quoted on his way down to Mar-a-Lago yet again, this time to meet with the Chinese president and not play golf, I think. Or at least the Chinese don't play golf. He may leave them at Mar-a-Lago and go play around on Saturday morning. I don't know. I would know if I was actually recording this on Monday, which I'm not. It's Friday here where I am. But at any rate, we'll know by the time this airs whether or not he played golf. But, on his way down on the plane, I guess he felt like it was a good time to brag. Why not? Anytime's a good time to brag for Donald Trump. And he made sure everyone knew that the latest stupid fabrication that he was willing to put his name to was that many people are saying that we have had one of the most successful 13 weeks of the first 13 weeks of a presidency in American history. I'm the greatest. Thank you. Of course, he's only had 11 weeks in office, and the assertion would have been ridiculous whether he had gotten the number right or not. At first, I thought perhaps he was thinking, I've had the most successful 13 trips to the golf course at the beginning of the presidency in history. That would be true, except for the fact that he has made 14 trips to the golf course and very well may have hit the golf course again for a 15th time. And left the Chinese president in the lurch, for all I know. We'll find out. I'll find out. You'll find out how I find out on Tuesday when I come back. But I did want to make sure that you had some fresh material to enjoy at the beginning of the week. It's a tough period. It's spring break here at Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, which is to say my house. So you won't hear the kids running around so much in the background today, though they are here because, of course, I pre-recorded this. But our Tuesday through Thursday shows might include some measure of that, and I hope you'll all enjoy it. But we have put together a weird show again today to follow up on the weird show of Friday. A little more of the pieces of the puzzle about international man of mystery and noted weirdo Stephen K. Bannon and his connections with the Mercers. A little more about that coming up. I have an odd story to start things off, just a good Monday start, and then a return to the weirdness of Donald Trump and his connections with Russians and other international bad hombres, if you will. And that'll make considerably more sense when we get around to that story later on today. Why bad hombres? It's not Mexico, but they speak the same language. Here's an interesting one I picked up on, I guess on Twitter, and it's reprinted here in KUT 90.5, Austin's NPR station, their webpage, but it does note here that it says this story was originally performed as a part of Pop-Up Magazine, which is something I don't know anything about. I'm just curious. I clicked through here. Interesting. A night of true stories, documentary films, photography, and radio from some of our favorite writers, performers, and musicians, unrecorded live on stage. An interesting concept. Tells me nothing about the story, though, so I'll just go to the story itself to tell that. This is like a, I don't know, what do you think? A feel-good story? Just, I don't know. This is very nice. It's political, sort of, kind of, in nature. It's procedural in nature. It appeals to me. I like it. It's got some obscure procedural issues wrapped up in it, and all driven by just some average interested citizen, which is also of interest to me. He got a bad grade. It starts out, that's the title. He got a bad grade, so he got the Constitution amended. It's not one of Donald Trump's sons. It's someone else. Now he's getting the credit he deserves. Oh, good. Credit that people deserve. I love when people deserve credit and then get it. This is a story written here by Matt Largey. I'm guessing a Largey, I don't know, Largey, over at the KUT.org website. It's really interesting. With everything that's going on in politics these days, it helps to remember the power that we have as individuals to make change. Yeah, whatever. Examples of this are far too few, of course, but there is one that stands out, and you've probably never heard it, which means these guys are the hipsters and you're just a bunch of losers. The story begins in 1982. Some of you never heard it because it was before you were born, but I was alive. Anyway, this guy was even older than me. He's 19 years old. A 19-year-old sophomore, he's not 19 now, named Gregory Watson, was taking a government class at UT Austin. For the class, he had to write a paper about a governmental process. So he went to the library and started poring over books about the U.S. Constitution, one of his favorite topics. I'll never forget it as long as I live, Gregory says. I pull out a book that has within it a chapter of amendments that Congress has sent to state legislatures, but which not enough state legislatures approved in order to become part of the Constitution. And this one just jumped right out at me. I'd like to see that book. As a matter of fact, that unratified amendment read as follows: no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. Basically, it means any raise Congress votes to give itself can't take effect until after the next election, allowing voters to decide how they felt about that. The amendment had been proposed almost 200 years earlier. I actually knew that this was the story of this amendment, but I didn't know that this guy was involved in this amendment. This is the astonishing part. The amendment had been proposed almost 200 years earlier in 1789. It was written by James Madison. What? The founders, and then we didn't pass. Unbelievable. Written by James Madison, and it was intended to be one of the very first amendments right along with the Bill of Rights. But it didn't get passed by enough states at the time. You see, to ratify an amendment, you needed 3/4 of states to approve it. This amendment, though it was 200 years old, didn't have a deadline. Gregory was intrigued. He decided to write his paper about the amendment and argue that it was still alive and could be ratified. He got to work being very meticulous about citations and fonts and everything. We really have to be meticulous about fonts. And in 1982, forgery! They didn't have fonts for you to be meticulous about in 1982. Unbelievable. I doubt very much whether it was fonts he was being meticulous about. Why would you even now, why would you say someone was meticulous about that? All right, well, whatever. Anyway, he turned it in to the teaching assistant for his class, and he got it back with a C. He didn't know what to make of it. He was sure it was better than a C. He appealed the grade to the professor, Sharon Waite. It's W-A-I-T-E. In case you want to go and yell at Sharon Waite. Don't do it. I don't recommend it. I kind of glanced at it, but I didn't see anything that was particularly outstanding about it, and I thought the C was probably fine, she recalls. Most people would have just taken the grade and left it at that. Gregory is not most people. That's usually true of any individual. You're just one person, but I get the point. It's a metaphor. So, or is it? No, it isn't. I don't know. You tell me. Parts of speech, not really my thing. Constitution, that much I understand. So, I thought right then and there, I'm going to get that thing ratified. That'd do it. That would prove the point. And it's not like it's a bad amendment either, but what an interesting thing just to think to yourself. I will prove myself right, and I will change the Constitution. Gregory needed 38 states to approve the amendment. That's 3/4. That would have been the total. 9 states had already approved it, most back in the 1790s. So that meant he needed 29 more states for it to pass. He wrote letters to members of Congress to see if they knew anyone in their home states who might be willing to push the amendment in their state legislature. I mean, it was a hot topic. Maybe not in 1982, but it certainly became one. It's a great topic for an amendment. Well, I mean, I guess that's supposed to tell you something about the wisdom of the founders, although it is really interesting that people just abandoned the wisdom of the founders. I guess in 1790, or in the 1790s, that was an easier thing to do. Oh my God, the founders want. You mean this guy here or me? Don't worry about me. I'm fine. We're free from England and we have a strong central government. I'm cool. I don't really need to be thought of as the founders, but I don't know. Maybe some of them had egos. Who knows? Anyway, It was probably less of a incentive to say, the founders really wanted this back in the 1790s, and then, time passes, and then people forget about it. Interesting. So he needs 29 states. He writes members of Congress to see if they know anyone in their home states who might push the amendment in their state legislatures. When he did get a response, it was generally negative. Some said the amendment was too old. That, there's nothing to do with it, but okay. Some said they just didn't know anyone who'd be willing to help. Mostly he got no response at all. Although it may be a bad idea to have gone to members of the of Congress to ask for their help in a constitutional amendment that makes it considerably more difficult for them to raise their own pay. But, he thought he might find people of goodwill there, or just honest brokers. But I guess not. And he found at least one anyway. Then a senator from Maine, honest people, named William Cohen, did get back to him. I remember him. Cohen passed it on to someone back home, who passed it on to someone else, who introduced it in the Maine legislature. In 1983, lawmakers passed it. Sure, it makes good old-fashioned common sense. It makes sense to start in New England, too, doesn't it? Anyway, let's see. So in 1983, lawmakers passed it. So I'm thinking, my first success story. This can actually be done, Gregory says. Feeling emboldened, Gregory started writing every state lawmaker he thought might be willing to help. He wrote dozens of letters. After a while, it started to work. Colorado passed the amendment in 1984, and then it picked up momentum. 5 states in 1985, 3 each in 1986, 87, and 88. 7 states in 1989 alone, including Texas. Amazing. And as you can see, as the 80s roll on and people start to become concerned for whatever reasons, largely propagandistic, about the federal debt and the deficits and, federal spending overall, and of course, term limits and pay raises for Congress and all kinds of issues. They all sort of came to a head. It came at the right time. By 1992, 35 states had passed the amendment. Only 3 more to go. Now, this is 10 years after he took the class, by the way. Oh, it says right here, after 10 years of letter writing, sweet talking, and shaming, Gregory was within reach of his goal. On May 5th, 1992, both Alabama and Missouri passed it, and on May 7th, as Gregory listened on the phone, the Michigan House of Representatives put the amendment over the top. His quest was finally over. More than 200 years after it was written, the 27th amendment was finally ratified. I did treat myself to a nice dinner at an expensive restaurant, Gregory recalls. Though it did come to light later that, unbeknownst to anyone, Kentucky had ratified the amendment in 1792, which made Alabama the 38th state to ratify it. Oh, I'm sorry, made Alabama, I guess we should have emphasized, made Alabama the 38th state to ratify it. Michigan was just superfluous, but it was nice that they let him listen on the phone. There is a nice photo in here documenting from the archivist of the United States the proclamation declaring the 27th Amendment to be part of the Constitution. I don't know if that's something they sent him a copy of or anything, but it's a nice look at what happens when you amend the Constitution and physically how do they manifest that. I'm always just kind of fascinated by that. Okay. So let's continue on with the story. What's so striking about this story is the sheer degree of difficulty of what Gregory did. Amending the Constitution is, by design, incredibly hard to do. The founders saw this as higher law, says Zach Elkins, a government professor at UT Austin, who introduced me to this story. So, in some sense, the Constitution should be beyond the reach of majorities, and certainly a majority in the legislature, which makes sense for higher law. You want something a little bit more stable. But here's a guy, really a kid when he began, who actually did it. The 27th Amendment is still the most recent amendment to the Constitution. It's very interesting. I'll pause here just for a second. I mean, I don't mean to diminish this because it really is just an interesting and amazing story. I particularly value it for the pushback that he got from professors and others, members of Congress. No, it's too old. It's expired somehow. There's no basis whatsoever for saying something like that. It just seems truthy, I guess. And I mean, I love the story because it just goes to show you that members of Congress really very often have little to no idea what the hell they're talking about, even about matters which should fall within their jurisdiction, or their bailiwick anyway, depending on how you want to describe it, shouldn't they know about the Constitution and the process of amending it? Apparently they don't. I mean, it's been a long time since anyone else had, but why would you make up a reason? I really don't know, but they don't like to not have the answers, it seems. I don't know. It reminds me a lot of the whole nuclear option filibuster reform fight for many years, as you know from my talking to Armando about it on Tuesday, and all the sorts of discussions we've had about these things, and discussions we've had with Joan about this stuff. For years, the beginning of the filibuster reform movement in our circles was all about just hearing from the press and members of Congress and pundits and political experts all over the place. This is not right. This can't happen. It's not how it's done. You don't understand. It takes 60 votes to do anything. It takes 67 to change the rules. No. Listen to me, young man. You don't know what you're talking about. And here I was reading, first of all, I mean, most of the idea, I mean, I'll tell you quite honestly that the nuclear option isn't my invention. It was a Republican idea, or rather a Republican write-up of it that I read first and said, there's no reason why this couldn't work. I didn't like it at first, and I still don't love it, but I mean, I certainly didn't like it, what it was going to be used for in 2005 when I first read about it. But there was nothing about it really that made me say, I really think this can't work. I had objections to it. I had things you could say about it, arguments you could make against it at the time, but I really didn't think there was anything about it that would mean it wouldn't work. But everybody else thought so. It was in their interest to make sure that everybody else knew for sure that they knew for sure that this could not be done. This was a total misunderstanding. This was an amateurish idea. It was stupid. And so, it became kind of it became a thing with me, in very much the same way it became a thing with this guy that, the only way to prove that it can work is to make it work. But it also reminds me a lot of the arguments we had over, a number of things, during the passage of Obamacare the first time around in 2010, when Kent Conrad, as chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, insisted that the House had to vote first on accepting the Senate version of the bill, and only then could they use the reconciliation process to make changes afterwards. And I really saw nothing that required that. And in fact, I did find some precedent that no, his argument underlying his insistence that the House go first, it was really just political. He wanted that thing passed, and he wanted the House to agree to the Senate version so that the House couldn't any longer press for a stronger public option or anything like that. But he leveraged that preference into, and his expertise as budget committee chairman that makes you automatically a wonk in Washington, D.C. I mean, it should make you a wonk because you should come to understand these arcane processes that you're in charge of. But we've seen more recently that, for instance, Paul Ryan never really seemed to master them, but because he was budget committee chairman, everybody thought he was a wonk. We blew that one up pretty quick. Well, not pretty quick. It took us a couple of years, but very recently we've seen that fall apart. But Kent Conrad told everybody that the House had to accept the Senate version of Obamacare first before they could go forward with any of the promised fixes that they were going to include in reconciliation. The argument being, and it does make some facial common sense, but if you really think about it, it doesn't make all that much sense. The idea was you can't use reconciliation because reconciliation is designed to make changes in existing law such that it brings the effect of these laws in line with the reconciliation instructions contained in the budget resolution of that year. In other words, you wanted to reconcile the effect of existing law with the budgetary goals you had set out for yourself that year in the budget resolution. So it was his contention that you can't amend law that hasn't been enacted yet, which is what reconciliation was supposed to be about. You would change existing law to bring it in line with your budgetary goals, and you do that by amending current law, and you cannot amend law that doesn't yet exist on the books. Of course, that was Well, you know what? Like I said, it was truthy sounding. People were like, oh, yeah. You can't amend the law unless it's the law. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That's 100% right. But, I mean, hello, we do this every single day in Congress. What do you mean you can't amend law that hasn't been adopted or enacted as law yet? Every time you file an amendment in the House or the Senate, you're seeking to amend law that hasn't been enacted yet. You're amending it in the process of passing it. We amend law that hasn't been enacted all the time. That's the main business of Congress. Well, it used to be anyway, before they became entirely partisan bodies. But that's a basic legislative function. What about reconciliation? Was there anything in the rules as enshrined statutorily, as we learned about the Budget Act, that says it couldn't be done? No. Anything in the rules of the House or the rules of the Senate? No. Absolutely not. All it is instead of amending existing law, you would make a correction in the enrollment process for, containing the instructions or the contents of the reconciliation bill. You just pass a reconciliation bill that says, at the moment, you could just, instead of designating a section of existing statutory law to be changed, you could direct that an existing paragraph or whatever of a pending bill be changed. I could find no reason whatsoever why a reconciliation bill couldn't direct you to make a change in a pending, whether a pending bill, an enrolled bill, or an engrossed bill awaiting enrollment. These are all sort of terms of art for different points in the process of moving a bill to the president's desk. A bill that's pending, hasn't been voted on yet. You vote on a bill, pass it in both houses, and then the bill is engrossed, I think is the first stage of it, at which point all of the various disparate amendments made to it are added in the proper places, and you get your final draft, and then a bill is enrolled. The final proofread version of it that's supposed to have no mistakes in it, but occasionally you'll find has plenty of mistakes in it, is then sent to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, and they're signed and then dispatched to the White House. That's, all of that stuff. Although now that I think about it, I don't know if it's the clerk of the House and the Senate secretary or whether it's the officers. But anyway, that part is esoteric. You're very rarely going to be quizzed on that stuff. Maybe we can look it up. We'll figure it out which one it is. But the important point was there was nothing preventing you from making your changes at the same point you usually make your changes on a pending bill. But Kent Conrad insisted that that was the case. And everybody believed Kent Conrad and not me, and I understand why, even though I'm pretty sure I'm still right about that one, but haven't had the chance to be proven correct about that one. But again, I remember also, it wasn't that long ago, now that Gorsuch is back in the news, or rather, Gorsuch and Merrick Garland are back in the news. Greg doesn't like us referring to Gorsuch without mentioning Garland, of course, but I mentioned Garland because this was about Garland and not Gorsuch. You recall that I thought, well, I think if you get a little bit creative and you're willing to go a little bit nuclear, I think we could probably engineer a process by which we might be able to confirm Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court in the brief interim between the dissolution of the previous Congress and the swearing in of new members-elect or new senators-elect in the new Congress. And, met up with a lot of resistance on that one. And as I expected, it's new, it's weird, it's innovative, it's certainly counter to the spirit of the way you're supposed to conduct the place. Everybody knows that the senators-elect were meant to have a voice and a vote that day, but look, technicality exists. You want to take advantage of it once in a while. I want a partisan win as much as anybody. So I was willing to at least give it some thought. Of course, one of the guys over at the Federalist, who for whatever reason decided that he had to pick up on this and attack it. But it wasn't but a couple weeks later that we found out that, no, on principle, it seems like it really holds up the contention that until the oath is administered, They are not members of that body and not entitled to engage in debate or cast a vote there. We found out about the member of Congress, was a Pacific Northwesterner, was it? I can't recall exactly even who it was, but the member of Congress who was away on personal business had gotten married just before the new year and was on his honeymoon during the switch over from the old Congress to the new, and wasn't present to take the oath, but had not, and then had missed the first couple days worth of voting. And they were noting for the record that the clerk of the House was not marking him as absent or not having voted during his absence. I don't know how you get marked as not absent during your absence, but the point of this was he wasn't counted as missing the votes because he wasn't technically a member of the House yet because he hadn't taken his oath. About as clear a demonstration that the people who really matter when it comes to mechanics like this think that if you don't take the oath, the 20th Amendment, the idea that your term begins at noon on January 3rd or whatever day it is designated otherwise by law for the beginning of the new Congress, that doesn't automatically trigger your membership in the House. It's the oath. I got all kinds of arguments that said all kinds of authorities said it was the exact opposite, and yet when push comes to shove, that very same year when a member of Congress did not take the oath, he was not considered a member of Congress until he did. You're all wrong, and I'm right. Hooray. How do you like this for a Friday show? This is a fantastic Friday show. I feel great. I'm going to have a fantastic weekend, and I hope you do too. Where were we? Oh, yes. There was a guy who actually amended the Constitution. That was much more important than any of the things I did. But the point here is that the feeling is the same. So, therefore, I amended the Constitution. Actually, what I was going to say about this, they're talking about what a remarkable accomplishment it was. And it was a remarkable accomplishment, although I will, that's not to say I can't diminish it a little bit. Are you ready for this one? One, he didn't write it, but I didn't write, either of my things either, I guess. And two, he had the advantage of it having been written by James Madison. That's certainly true. Three, it had been ratified by a couple of states before, but this was an enormous number of states that he had to get to do this. But one, the fact that it was, there's a history book that says, look, this was supposed to be one of the very first amendments, right along with the Bill of Rights. It was written by James Madison. That's going to get you in a lot of doors. Secondly, you saw when the momentum picked up for this thing. It's when there was a large-scale public campaign to freak people out about public spending and public debt and term limits and greedy congressmen and this and that and the other thing. In other words, it was a fantastic amendment. There was no harm in passing it either. Lots of people who said it's too old, I guess you would have countered with the argument of what's the difference? Go ahead and pass it. It's not like if you pass one that's too old, the opposite happens. Are you disturbed or worried about being on record as voting for the concept that members of Congress can't just raise their own pay themselves huge amounts of money and take off with it before the voters get to ratify it? It's a pretty much a no-brainer for politicians, I would think. I'd love to know who voted against this thing, if anybody. But so it helps to have a no-brainer of an amendment that was written by James Madison himself as a starting point. That certainly helped. I don't know that you would have been able to do it with almost anything else. Now I want to see this book. What else didn't they ratify? If it's a magical thing, if the guy's got the Midas touch, what else is waiting out there to be ratified? Probably nothing. Nothing as good as this one, which is why this one jumped out to him. He's smart. It makes sense to him. He knew he had a political opportunity, and in addition to a personal opportunity. It's fun. It's a great story. In fact, what's the guy's name? Not the guy who did it. Zach Elkins was the government professor at UT who was just being interviewed for this story when we left off. Right? He says his story is very much an Austin story, says Zach. You'd expect people wandering the streets talking about their grand project for changing the country. And here is Greg Watson, who is not just wandering the streets muttering about the 27th Amendment. He actually got it passed. And it's comforting to know that one person really can make a difference. I wanted to demonstrate that one extremely dedicated, extremely vocal, energetic person could push this through, Gregory says. I think I demonstrated that. I think you did too. I know you did. I'm looking at it right now. Gregory has kept pursuing these kinds of quests since then. Terrific. In 1995, he realized Mississippi had never ratified the 13th Amendment. Now that's a little more serious. And one that you'll actually get serious resistance to, believe it or not. I mean, everyone probably believes it, but you shouldn't have to believe it. It should be beyond question. But okay, they never ratified the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, by the way, in case you didn't have a constitution handy. So he pushed that state's legislature to do it, and it worked. It was symbolic, but it meant something. Gregory has been a state legislative aide and a city council aide in Austin for years. Lately, his project has been getting the city to put up street signs at intersections that don't have them. That's, that's a downgrade maybe from constitutional amendments, but it's important nonetheless. They don't want to put a sign at Andrews, Zilker, and Columbus Drive, but I'll keep pestering them. And finally, they will. They did, by the way. I'm glad to know. Another section of the story here, making the grade. Back in 1992, as Gregory celebrated his achievement with the 27th Amendment, things weren't going well for his former professor, Sharon Waite. She had moved back to South Texas in the 10 years since Gregory was her student. She tried to get a teaching job down there, but with no luck. I was feeling sorry I'd spent all those years studying and, nothing, Sharon says. She'd look at all the papers and books and stuff she'd collected over the years, getting her master's degree and her PhD, and she wondered, what was it all for? Until one day, she gets a phone call from someone writing a book about constitutional amendments. And they said, well, did you teach at UT Austin in the early 80s? And I said, yes, I did. And then they asked, did you know that one of your students, Gregory Watson, pursued getting this constitutional amendment passed because you gave him a bad grade? Sharon was blown away. And in that moment, she actually felt redeemed. Many people have said, you never know what kind of effect you're going to have on other people and on the world. And now I'm in my 70s, and I've come to believe that's very, very true. And this is when it really hit me, because I thought to myself, you have, just by making this fellow a grade he didn't like, affected the U.S. Constitution more than any of your fellow professors ever thought about it. And how ironic is that? That's a weird sentence, but okay. And with the benefit of hindsight, Sharon says Gregory clearly doesn't deserve that C she gave him. My goodness, he certainly proved he knew how to work the Constitution and what it meant and how to be politically active, she says. So yes, I think he deserves an A after that effort, A+. And that's exactly what happened. Zach Elkins, the UT professor we heard from earlier, engineered a grade change for Gregory. This month, Sharon signed a form to officially change the grade. At the Pop-Up Magazine show at the Paramount Theater in Austin on March 4th, we brought Gregory up on stage to surprise him with the grade change. To justify it, Sharon writes, in light of the students' heroic efforts to prove the professor and TA wrong in their assessment of his term paper, Mr. Watson deserves A+. It still has to be stamped by some people at UT, and we're stickler for process here. I think we can say that safely. It still has to be stamped by some people at UT, but when it is, 35 years after Gregory wrote the paper, he'll finally get that C changed to an A. And that's reason enough in my book for him to have gone ahead with it. What a crazy story and a fantastic opportunity for some rants of my own. Hopefully that makes for some good Friday listening. And I guess I should have saved this story for next Friday. It turns out I'll probably have to record an episode for that too. And then I really could have used it for actual Good Friday, which is something I've been trying to get right for a long time. I stopped making that Good Friday joke for a while, but it would be a good time to bring it back. Oh well, one opportunity missed. Too bad. Here's something that I alluded to briefly in discussions with Armando on Thursday, but which I wanted to carry over from the Friday show, which was talking all about the Mercers and the things that they funded and the way that they backed Steve Bannon and turned him into what was supposed to look like a political genius, which I guess only lasted as long as it took for them to, I guess, Kushner's, who it's rumored to be pushing him off the National Security Council, which he totally meant, and that I was only there to monitor Flynn, which was a terrible excuse to begin with on about 15 different levels. But anyway, of course, another thing. Let's talk about the political genius of immediately blaming Kushner and going to war with him. It's like I'm pretty sure that's the one staffer you can't beat. And of course, he pulled out the alt-right's favorite slur too, calling him a cuck, which, you know, it's taken on its own meaning for the alt-right. But I guess if you go right back to the whole thing, I mean, are we saying that Steve Bannon is saying that somebody else is sleeping with Ivanka? I don't know how happy the boss is going to be about that. I don't know whether he's a political genius. Well, I don't know. Anyway, connected to that, I had alluded to this on Thursday, that it turned out that the Mercers were bankrolling Milo Yiannopoulos, or at least his speaking tour as well. And you remember that this was a big-ish deal immediately post-election. It was a big deal that he was touring around the country speaking on college campuses. Now, you may recall that college tour created a lot of controversy, obviously, because Milo Yiannopoulos is a disgusting human being for a number of reasons. And, of course, he was just, reveling in the disturbance he was causing. And they also attempted, of course, to rile up sentiment against any protests or resistance movements, insisting that it was the liberals who were truly violent in all this, because they were, of course, becoming violent and trying to prevent Yiannopoulos from speaking on campus. And, lots of varied opinion on that one, but of course we were at the height of the Nazi punching craze, and it was difficult to nail down just where the line was with all these guys. And, did we read on the air? I think I read some of the profiles of the young men who went along as the crew on this speaking tour. And it was really interesting. And, protesters at the colleges in particular were making, I thought, a relatively good point, which was, is this really what we want university money used for, financing a speaking tour like this? Well, there's a bit of a surprise in this muck rock piece, written by, what's the name here? Matthew Goriglia, who, I probably mispronounced that somehow, but that's approximately how it's spelled. But interesting in detailing the relationship between Milo and the Mercers. We got a bit of a surprise in this. Let me read it to you. Again, the title, it's a March 24th date on this at muckrock.com. The same billionaire that funded Trump's campaign bankrolled Milo's college speaking tour. University of Washington records confirm Yiannopoulos' speaking fee as $0 and entirely self-financed. Now, I guess it's not self-financed, it's Mercer-financed, but how interesting is that? He was running around the country on this big speaking tour, which you'd think was financed by speaking fees from all these places. So I guess that complaint doesn't really hold much water, but how interesting that he was able to put on this big show and get national attention and even try and rile up sentiment against any sort of opposition or resistance or protest, while receiving $0 for any of this work. It wasn't that he wasn't receiving $0. Of course, it was that he was receiving money not from the colleges, but from the Mercers. What a bargain. Over the last year, the article begins, Breitbart's former ethno-nationalist troll provocateur got into a big bus with his face on it and traveled around the country to speak at college campuses. After his ousting from Breitbart, I began requesting documents relating to Milo Yiannopoulos' speaking tour. By the way, this is not the first sort of report that Milo is a bit of a, a bit of a grifter and living on the dole right from the beginning. I recall the first time I became aware of Milo Yiannopoulos at all was when we were hearing reports that most of his columns or most of the posts that he was writing at Breitbart were in fact written by interns, some paid, possibly some unpaid, but that he had like an army of interns that did all the work, and he just slapped his name on it and collected checks from Breitbart. Very interesting angle on all this. But so he's back at it again. And I mean, how much does it cost to drive around with a bus with your face on it, too? All the while, of course, I'm sure insisting that the protesters were all wrong and the market, the free market, wanted this speech to go on. And they were all wrong for getting in the way of the invisible hand, which was actually just tucking folded bills into his pocket and paying for the whole thing. Anyway, our writer here continues, I was curious to know how much these college Republicans were shelling out to have him come to their campus to berate trans students, and we should recall that that was a big part of his show, or what sort of riders were attached to his appearance. Instead, I got a larger understanding of the few super rich individuals funding a conservative movement. In May of 2016, Yiannopoulos joked on his Facebook page about his speaking fee. And the joke, I guess, is supposed to be rather subtle. It says, people keep asking me what my speaking fee is. And he just has a picture of a guy sort of giving a knowing eye roll-ish look. It's not an eye roll, but just sort of the side eye, like. And it says here, as it turns out, despite his constant objectification of black men, and it is a picture of a black man in this photo, which he often cites as a reason why he's not racist, his speaking fee is actually $0. The next photo embedded here is what looks like a picture of the contract under which he was working. And it's very interesting. I'll bring you hearkening back to the Friday show. It's just up at the top, like letterhead, just a big Milo. It's not stylized in any way. It just says Milo, but I guess that's what he works with. But there's another organizational name at the top, at the letterhead, designating the other party to the performance agreement that they have here. Milo is the first billing here, and right underneath, Glittering Steel LLC. Who could forget that name? All right, well, it's one of the Mercer organizations that they run in concert with Bannon, right? So here's the text of it that's available here. It is mutually agreed between the parties as follows. Event organizer hereby engages Milo Yiannopoulos, and Milo Yiannopoulos agrees to perform the engagement subject to all of the terms set forth herein and those contained, they missed the word in, contained the rider page attached hereto, which are hereby fully incorporated and made part of this agreement. Please sign and initial all pages, including the rider page. And I guess I don't know whether this is strictly for the University of Washington appearance, but that's the one that he got here, since that's where he started requesting the paperwork. So let's see. We got Friday, January 20th, 2017, Seattle, Washington, at University of Washington, Kane Hall 130. Event billing, Milo Yiannopoulos. Speaking fee, $0. Crowd restrictions, open to public. Load time, 6:30 p.m. Doors time, 7 p.m. Show time, 7:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Curfew time, 10 p.m. I guess that all has to be listed in order to get your show on the road there. So, who funds this endeavor? Who pays for a team of young men to travel the country in a tour bus? The answer resides in the organization behind the tour. Glittering Steel LLC is a small production company located in the same address in Beverly Hills. We hate coastal elites. In Beverly Hills as Breitbart News and a number of other companies owned and supported by Trump-supporting hedge funder Robert Mercer. Glittering Steel reportedly made a few small campaign ads for the Trump and Cruz campaigns and has received $950,090 from the super PAC Make America #1, according to FEC filings compiled by reporter Grant Stern. Make America #1, which employed both Steve Bannon and Kellyanne Conway at various points during the election cycle, received $15 million of Robert Mercer's disclosed $22 million made in donations during the 2015 and 16 primaries and election. Mercer also invested $10 million in Breitbart News, Yiannopoulos' former employer. So now we can add toxic college speaking tour to the list of things, along with a presidency and far-right media outlet that Robert Mercer's super PAC has funded in the last few years. And then he includes, here it says, read the full document embedded below or on the request page. And I guess this is all of the paperwork that he got out of his request for documents about the University of Washington appearance. So let's see. There's some host information, which is redacted here. I guess that would be the name probably of one of the, I guess, the student contact or perhaps faculty contact at University of Washington. Just checking through here. The hospitality rider, event organizer must provide the following: safe and secure day and overnight parking for 50-foot tour bus and 2 Suburbans. Campus security detail, 3 to 5 officers to assist with Milos' personal security detail. 24 bottles of, a 24, I guess, bottle case of spring water. Separate green room close to stage. 2 hotel rooms. It says optional on that one. Why would that be? I don't know. Okay, they decided to make that optional. The technical rider. The venue must be available to the crew at least 2 hours before doors for setup and 1 hour after event for breakdown. Event organizer must provide the following: hardwired internet connection, Ethernet preferred, 1 6-foot table, 2 small chairs for video setup, 1 power source to table for a PC, 1 projector and 1 projector screen. Preferred setup for house PA system, more garbage, but let's see if there's anything funny in here. A wireless mic for Milo, a podium mic for hosts, wireless or handheld mic if needed for interviewer, 1 or 2 mics on stands for Q&A, and 1 output to our mixer, XLR or 1/4-inch cables provided by the tour. Relevant contacts, let's see, blah, blah, blah. The lead booking agent, by the way, in case you were wondering, is Zachary Lecomte Goebel. The phone number is here. I don't need to necessarily give out, but interestingly, he has a Yiannopoulos.net email address. Let's see, day of event and production manager, blah, blah, blah. Another Yiannopoulos.net. So I guess these are his crew. Director of security. I don't know if you need to know that. Let's see, what else? Anything else? Nothing out of the ordinary. So no, like, all green M&Ms or anything like that. Interesting. I really hadn't thought much about the possibility that he wasn't collecting speaking fees from the universities, but was rather, bought and paid for by the Mercers on this one. Another interesting thing. I mean, imagine what they're thinking about, getting the return on their money. Everybody's talking about this crazy tour and all the focus that's on it, and all they had to do was buy the whole thing. There's no market demand for Yiannopoulos and what he's saying. There's a 0 speaking fee. But I guess it reminds me also of, like, I have always heard it rumored that Rush Limbaugh has a very odd kind of deal and for getting his show carried by local radio stations, so he was, widely distributed. But I'm not certain how he got paid. But I guess they weren't paying anything to put his show on the air, but there was somehow a deal in place so that he could get paid, millions and millions of dollars. No doubt he wasn't going to forego that. But it's interesting that they structure these deals, and then, of course, they go and scream about the market demanding their point of view, et cetera, when really there's no market forces at work on it at all. I find that very strange. It actually reminds me an awful lot about the one appearance I made on C-SPAN during the Washington Journal thing, the thing they put on real early in the weekend mornings, or occasionally weekday mornings before they actually begin carrying the congressional debate. And they have people on, the host asks questions, there's callers. Sometimes we had callers. It was crazy stuff. And I was on with Robert Bluey was his name. Not, that would, I guess, translate Robert shortened to Bob. So it's Bob Bluey. Bob. I'm wondering if his middle initial was A. Bob Bluey. Anyway, we were on together. He was from the Heritage Foundation's blog. And, he's advanced in the Heritage Foundation hierarchy since then. I guess I was on representing Daily Kos, and, it was an amiable enough discussion. I thought it was really interesting. The thing that actually raised his eyebrows was, I guess he was surprised to find out that I and Daily Kos took no interest in the revival of the fairness doctrine, which I guess he thought all liberals want that back, and we really weren't particularly interested in having it come back. And I guess also of interest, I don't know whether we discussed it on the air, but it certainly came up in the discussion that, ironically enough, Robert's work at the Heritage Foundation is all Republican donor funded, and it's underwritten entirely by the Heritage Foundation and, the donations that they took in. And it's, in other words, a subsidized endeavor as opposed to a business venture. I mean, people, I guess it's still an economic act to decide to donate to the Heritage Foundation, but they were doing it for political reasons instead. Whereas at that point, the Daily Kos operation was advertising funded. We were literally just out there on the market, and if there wasn't interest in advertising at Daily Kos, there was at that point no sustainable Daily Kos. The model has changed, and now I guess in theory it's actually considerably closer to where the Heritage Foundation model is, in that it's largely funded by donations instead. But at the time, it was just very interesting to see the free marketeers being subsidized by the generosity of political donors, and the liberals out there making their money in the advertising world instead. Anyway, I mean, we were a hybrid model even at that point, probably, and there's no harm done to the free market by having people donate because they believe in the same ideology as the Heritage Foundation, except for the harm that's done to the economy in general by the ideology of the Heritage Foundation. Just an interesting addition to our picture. And, of course, there's even more out there. And before moving on, just one more quick piece about Bannon, and I kind of want to add to the record here, if I can get it centered on the screen here. Media Matters came up with this one the other day, and I thought it was kind of interesting. A piece that says that someone at Breitbart, someone tied to Breitbart, as they put it, is lying about when Stephen Bannon left. That is, when he left the organization, moving on to both the Trump campaign and then later the Trump White House. And you remember the context in which that came up, when Breitbart News was trying to get their permanent press passes to the Senate press gallery. Let's see. Matt Gertz is the writer on this one. Someone tied to Breitbart is lying about when Stephen Bannon left. How do we know this? Breitbart.com's bid for the press corps big leagues has become ensnared by the shifting series of stories told about how and when the site's leader officially left to work for President Donald Trump. White House Chief Strategist Stephen Bannon served as executive chairman of Breitbart.com until resignation on August 16th. That in quotes. Until resignation on August 16th, the day before he joined Trump's presidential campaign, according to his financial disclosure forms. Another revelation from those. But that claim contradicts a Breitbart press release dated August 17th, which stated that Bannon was taking, quote, a temporary leave of absence from Breitbart and will resume work with Breitbart the evening of November 8th, 2016. Maybe that was just a reflection of their expectation that Trump would lose and lose horribly, but that's what they put out there. Last month, it is added here, as many have noted, Breitbart CEO Larry Solov sent a letter to the credentialing committee for Capitol Hill reporters claiming that Bannon had resigned on or about November 13th, the date Bannon's White House role was announced. Bannon's date of resignation and possible ongoing ties to the website are key issues in the website's bid for permanent congressional press credentials, a precursor to gaining access to the White House Correspondents Association and joining the White House press pool. I would also point out again, it should be of some interest if the president's chief strategist cohabits with a news outlet's offices. I think someone might want to know about that, but I guess not. The members of the Standing Committee of the Senate Press Gallery have been skeptical of Solov's February claim that Bannon had resigned by phone, I would be too, and of the letter he produced last month. Even written communications should be doubted, as I've said many times. The committee continues to deny the website's bid for credentials and is requesting more information from Breitbart by April 14th. Bannon's financial disclosures show that the Standing Committee was right not to take Solov's word. Either Bannon lied on his forms or Solov lied to the committee. Or both is possible, too, I would add. Moreover, for roughly a month, even after November 13th, the date Solov claims Bannon resigned, Breitbart staffers continued to identify Bannon as, quote, on leave from the website. Joel Pollack, the website's senior editor-at-large, regularly referred to him using that language in articles defending Bannon from criticism, meaning that if Bannon had left the website, that information was unknown even at the highest levels of the outlet's staff. Breitbart did not consistently identify Bannon as a former employee until mid-December, 4 months after Bannon claims in his disclosure that he resigned. Here's the clips to prove it from a November 17th article. Bannon remains on leave of absence from Breitbart after joining the Trump campaign as CEO in August. On November 20th, Bannon has been on leave as executive chairman of Breitbart News since being appointed the CEO of the Trump campaign in August. November 21st, in 2 separate interviews conducted since Bannon, on leave from Breitbart, was appointed chief strategist and senior counsel to the president-elect, Bannon has made his views explicit. These are the explanations and clips of various Breitbart articles continuing to insist that he was on leave somehow. I don't know whether that'll be the undoing of the press passes, and I wonder whether I guess they could just do like, what's his name did, Guckert, way back when with Talon News, and the White House can just give him day passes for as long as it wants, but I don't know. Somehow, I'm intrigued by this. It's probably a minor point in the whole Steve Bannon puzzle, but I wanted to add that one to the collection because I have a feeling like that one will somehow come back around at some point, and we'll hear more about it. Let's see, to sort of round things out and try and transition away from the focus on Bannon. I still find myself drawn back to that task of filling in the blanks on this guy. Do you remember when we read the story about the Julia Hahn, the right-hand woman, Steve Bannon's right-hand woman, the other day? I read it and I retweeted at the time. Dana Hool had made some comments that I thought should be read as companion thoughts to our own on Julia Hahn, but I don't know if I made this clear, certainly not in the broadcast that day, but he makes a great point about this. I'll just use this to revisit that story. But you remember that we did remark on, oh boy, here's another one of these alt-righties who can't stand global elites, but who is from a prep school product from Beverly Hills. That never made any tremendous amount of sense. But then I remember, this is a point that Dana picked up on, and I remember very distinctly when I was reading the story, thinking in my head, I want to dispute this, but I'm not certain of my facts, so I'm going to move on and not make a note of it. But here it is. He makes a series of observations, and I guess we should run through all of them. You remember her story, basically, perhaps. But Dana says, is the author, one he wanted to know about the author of the piece, and we identified him. I remembered him as the guy who had, Ben Terrace, right? He was the one who had written the story about Aaron Schock in his Downton Abbey office. But Dana remembered him as the same guy, as he says, who wrote that putrid piece about Benny Johnson, because this reads like the same sort of thing. This woman is a monster. She's a propagandist sowing hatred and lies, but this makes her out to be a sweet girl who went to college and maybe got her political kink on. He describes her as, describes this as a puff piece about the sweet little Lisa Simpson of racial nationalism. Seems kind of BS-y to me, and I think we felt pretty much the same thing. But he goes on to say, I could probably pick at every paragraph, but I'll just pick two. Not probably the most important, but two that leapt out at me. He says, first, this one. And this is the one that I skipped over. In her junior year at the University of Chicago, remember this? Hahn had 3 male roommates, and that raised my eyebrows, but we went on. 2 of whom were fellow philosophy majors, and one of whom was her then boyfriend, Miguel Andrade. Bryce Porter, who lived with Hahn for 2 years, said the housemates frequented a nightclub in a mostly black South Side neighborhood to listen to blues. I had my doubts about that. Andrade wrote poetry on a typewriter. Hahn collected vinyl records and worked for a time at a nearby shooting range. That's the one. That she worked at a nearby shooting range. And I remember saying to myself, University of Chicago, not a really super welcoming neighborhood at the time for shooting ranges. There probably wouldn't have been any. And a nearby shooting range. That's an awfully interesting place to work. And also, it should be pointed out, well, it gets pointed out in a minute here. Dana says, but it starts with the basic point. There is no nearby gun range close to the University of Chicago. In fact, there isn't a gun range in Chicago, period. This isn't just some obscure Chicago arcana. It's an important piece of McDonald versus City of Chicago, the SCOTUS decision gutting Chicago's gun laws, which was decided a year before Hahn went to work at the shooting range. She would have had to drive at least half an hour to the closest range, so it was not like having a job in a campus dining hall or a liquor store near campus. It was a political decision of some sort. If it happened at all, I would say. Besides, Dana then says, what University of Chicago student from Beverly Hills works a part-time job? Which leads to this, about her being with supposed outsiders. The job threw Hahn in with a feisty crowd of political outsiders. This, of course, would be after graduation. She struck up a rapport with Miller, a top aide for then Senator Jeff Sessions at the time, and now an architect of Trump's nativist policies. She left to work for Dave Bratt, the insurgent congressman from Virginia who toppled former Majority Leader Eric Cantor in a primary, and from there joined Breitbart, whose editor-in-chief, Alex Marlow, graduated from Harvard-Westlake 5 years before she did. Does that sound extremely outsidery to you? To be fair, the Washington Post style section is more like a 19th century Viennese paper than fashion photos. They publish a lot of what? I don't know. At some point, we lose track of Dana's line of thought here. Is responding to somebody who says, note that this is in the lifestyle section, because being a racist is best covered like a fad. There you go. That explains that last comment. Anyway, I thought that was really pretty interesting. Here we go. Now we can find the rest of his replies in here. At the time that is described in that paragraph, she was working for Laura Ingraham. We're told in the article that she went there as a liberal. Come on, Laura Ingraham isn't some outsider. And getting a gig with her, unpaid or paid, doesn't matter much if you're rich, of course. And it doesn't happen, though, without contacts, the kind you have if you went to Harvard-Westlake, the same ritzy high school that a few years before Hahn got there, graduated the guy who became Breitbart's editor-in-chief. There's so much horse crap we'll say. In that article, one could write a 20,000-word essay about it. The class cluelessness, the clubby bonhomie of the young media elite writing about a young media elite. The questions not asked. The fact that it seems to be mostly derivative of the New Yorker piece about Hahn. I haven't read that one. The failure to really lay out WTF she's written and how repugnant it really is, or any speculation of what made supposedly sweet little Julia Hahn into contemporary America's Julius Streicher. God, that piece is a steaming pile of moral, political, and journalistic dung, let's say. And then he finds out that he was right. It was Ben Terrace. And the piece he's talking about is Benny Johnson's comeback profile, or this written up, I guess, in Gawker. Benny Johnson's comeback profile was written by his friend. This is a J.K. Trotter piece in Gawker. And I don't remember it at all. And I don't remember the comeback piece either. But I'm sure many of you do. I just thought that was really kind of an interesting way to get back to Julia Hahn and close the books on that one. I want to now, though. I think we're done with that. I don't know if I can transition from that per se, but there's other stuff that I want to get to for sure. And how to make this transition, because there's 2 things, I think, 3 things, 5, 10 things I absolutely think have to be on the record here. Let me see if I can go by the length of the articles and get some idea about how long it would take to plow through some of these things. This one I might be able to save, although I do think it's important. But this one here, and this is a big departure from the Bannon stuff, from the Mercers stuff, from almost anything. But it goes back to a familiar source. And again, not so much pieces of the background puzzle for us to figure out where all the connections lie and things, but the bigger theoretical background that we're building about what makes this administration so abnormal and so dangerous. Going back to lawfare here, with Jack Goldsmith and Benjamin Wittes, all fully cognizant of the dangers of dipping too often into their pool, I do think that, I think that they look at this big picture, not normal issue from a very interesting sort of, they say 50,000-foot perspective, I guess. The grand bargain at risk, and we don't mean here the grand bargain that usually is referenced when we're talking about tax cuts or tax hikes coupled with entitlement cuts. Not that one, but the grand bargain of, I guess, what used to be called the liberal consensus, or now the Washington consensus, once liberal became a dirty word. The grand bargain at risk. What's at stake when the president alleges politics in intelligence? We're going to have to get this one on the record. Again, Jack Goldsmith and Benjamin Wittes. Ben Wittes on this one. Let's see. The U.S. intelligence community is on the verge of a crisis of confidence and legitimacy it has not experienced since the 1970s. Back then, the crisis was one of the community's own behavior. In the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, it's a long time, the intelligence community used its secret powers of surveillance and other forms of government coercion, often but not always at the behest of its political superiors, to spy on and engage in operations against Americans for political ends. At that time, politicians really did use executive branch intelligence tools to seek to monitor and harm political enemies, and exposure of that reality nearly destroyed the intelligence community. The problem was Hoover's illegal wiretaps, bugs, and break-ins, and his attempts to annihilate Martin Luther King and others. It was NSA's and CIA's domestic espionage and propaganda operations. It was Richard Nixon's many dirty tricks. The community survived because it entered a grand bargain with Congress and the American people in the 1970s. And it is that very grand bargain that today's crisis now threatens. Today's crisis is sparked by allegations both by President Trump and by some House Republicans of political misuse of the intelligence community by the Obama administration. While whether the allegations are entirely false or turn out to have elements of truth, and I guess I have to pause here, it's been a number of days just to be clear which political misuse of the intelligence community by the Obama administration. That would include everything from the Obama wiretapped Trump Tower allegations to the sister claim of Susan Rice rifled our files and unmasked members of the Trump transition team and campaign team on purpose as political targeting. So, whether these allegations are entirely false or turn out to have elements of truth, they put the intelligence community in the crosshairs, since some of the institutions that are supposed to be key legitimators are now functioning as delegitimators, which I guess, if you believe Steve Bannon, is part of the plan. He's de-operationalizing it by delegitimizing it, I guess, maybe. Does that sound like it makes any sense to anybody who knows what those words are supposed to mean? I don't know. The article continues, though. After all, entirely appropriate investigations of counterintelligence can easily look like inappropriate political meddling, and if the President and the House Intelligence Committee chairman are not merely defending the intelligence community, but are actively raising questions about its integrity, the bargain itself risks unraveling. The central elements of the grand bargain were these. The President and his intelligence bureaucracy were allowed to maintain robust surveillance and espionage capacities, he actually says, including domestically. But in exchange, Congress subjected them to significant legal restrictions on how they collected, analyzed, and disseminated intelligence information. A bevy of lawyers throughout the intelligence community and over time in the Justice Department monitored and enforced those restrictions. Domestic surveillance required a court order, including a court order from a new court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, for foreign intelligence investigations. And two new committees, the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, were to be kept fully and currently informed of all significant intelligence activities and would have robust oversight authorities. The idea was that the use of these powers would be documented and watched by institutions that could be trusted to keep secrets, but would act as credible surrogates for public oversight mechanisms. These reforms proved vital. Intelligence collection, including in the homeland, is essential to our security. But it is also among the most dangerous of government powers because it is so consequential, so secret, and so easy and tempting to abuse. Its legitimacy is inherently fraught. So it is crucial, not merely that the entire process be above board politically, but that it be seen to be above board. If enough people believe that the intelligence community is a political instrument of those in power to be used against opponents, it actually doesn't matter if that's untrue. So the key function of the grand bargain was not merely keeping the intelligence community actually within the law, but it also validating it to a public conditioned by Watergate and COINTELPRO to believe the worst, that the intelligence community was functioning within the law. This system, does that even make sense now? I'm thinking about the way that sentence was structured. Have I read that wrong? But I get the idea here. The key is to convince the public that everything is on the up and up, but also validating to a public conditioned by Watergate and COINTELPRO to believe the worst, that the intelligence community was, to believe the worst that the intelligence committee was, okay, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but I think what they're trying to get at is convincing people that even the worst elements of the intelligence community would have to function within the law. This system did not always work perfectly, like that last sentence, I guess, and it has every so often required strengthening. Sometimes, as in Iran-Contra, it was because of real abuse. Sometimes it was because of perceived abuses. Sometimes it was the result of changed technology. Sometimes it was the result of changed threat perception. But on the whole, the system of overlapping internal and external checks, combined with massive changes in intelligence community culture, worked well. It gave the intelligence community legitimate operating space in the midst of a political culture obsessed with movies about intelligence community plots and rogue operations. Even as Hollywood made Minority Report, An Enemy of the State, the intelligence community could carry on its business. That was a huge accomplishment. Another achievement of the Grand Bargain was the actual elimination of the great evil of governmental use of its vast intelligence apparatus for politically motivated surveillance. Well, more or less. They didn't do such a great job on that one, I don't think. And while it did not eliminate the perception in the mass culture that this was going on, and I don't, maybe I'm falling into that, but didn't we learn that they were, for instance, infiltrating Quaker peace groups during the run-up to an initiation of the Iraq War? And did we suddenly come to think that that was a brilliant thing to do and A-OK in our books? Or is that, in fact, some of that great evil of governmental use of vast intelligence apparatus for politically motivated surveillance? That's what it looks like to me. Jack Goldsmith wouldn't think so. These guys wouldn't think so. That's true, but they might be wrong about that. However, I'm willing to set that aside for the moment and continue with the rest of their argument. And while it did not eliminate the perception in the mass culture that this was going on, by way of newspaper reports that it was going on, it did give the community a powerful response to the suggestions of politically motivated misconduct. The response went like this: here are the rules. Here are the bodies we report to on our operations. We did not violate the rules, and our many oversight bodies, who in the round are credible actors, were kept fully informed. This basic system survived even the Snowden revelations. Many people found Snowden's disclosures of vast intelligence collection shocking, but though Snowden disclosed many technical legal problems with this surveillance, as well as some controversial legal judgments signed off on by the executive oversight apparatus, it also showed that the problem of politically motivated surveillance simply didn't exist. In the Snowden's context, yes. What I was just complaining about, I don't think happened under Snowden's purview. But okay. None of the thousands of pages of NSA revelations pointed to anything like the venal activities of the 1970s and before. And that's true. It wasn't NSA that was doing it. Yet events of the last year have put the domestic political use of surveillance tools front and center once again. And ironically, today it's the President of the United States and the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee who are alleging precisely that which the Snowden revelations did not show. The DNC hack was an unprecedented interference in the U.S. electoral processes. By design, it was meant to turn the political system against itself, and it succeeded. It called into question, for many Americans, the legitimacy of the election, though there is no evidence that any votes were tampered with or that the electoral outcome failed to reflect the will of the majorities in states constituting an electoral college majority. We know that the Obama administration hesitated to go public with what it knew about Russia's activities for fear of the appearance of its own meddling in the election. We don't know yet for sure what it did behind the scenes. The administration was in an impossible position. It would have been grossly irresponsible not to take the counterintelligence angle of the Russian operation extremely seriously and to find out what was going on, like maybe Susan Rice was after. But the pursuit of it necessarily entered the dangerous land of surveillance related to politics, particularly because there were, in fact, a bizarre number of connections between Russian intelligence and figures close to Trump. In other words, no responsible government would have failed to investigate the counterintelligence angle, despite, and indeed because of, its political context. Yet, the political context always spelled trouble for a community that wants and needs to stay clean of politics. This all had a predictable fallout even before Trump and Nunes got involved. The intelligence community reached the firm conclusion of Russian meddling to aid Trump. But to protect sources and methods, it revealed essentially no evidence supporting that conclusion. Because its conclusion had deep political implications, the failure to provide evidence left its credibility damaged or suspect with that portion of the country that actually needed convincing. It was only when Republican members of Congress and then Trump political appointees began to confirm that they had seen and believed the evidence that the claim seemed credible to those not inclined to believe it from the beginning. But the questions about the connection between Trump associates and the Russians, and possibly the DNC hack, continued. The last few days have seen not merely FBI Director James Comey confirming that there has been an investigation of this since last summer, but a plethora of new disclosures about connections between figures associated with Trump and the Russians. We don't know yet whether and to what degree any collection on Trump associates during the Obama administration was targeted or incidental. Either might well have been justified depending on the evidence and compliance with FISA. Assuming that any collection was only incidental, we also don't purport to know whether and to what degree the normal rules of minimization and sharing and unmasking were complied with. Yesterday, which isn't really yesterday anymore, Eli Lake of Bloomberg View reported that Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, sought to, quote, unmask the identities of U.S. persons, including Trump transition officials, that the government had incidentally collected and minimized in surveillance against foreign officials. There is no reason, at least not yet, to think that Rice or any other Obama officials did not follow the appropriate rules here. We assume that in this super sensitive context, the Obama team would have been super scrupulous to follow the rules. But we don't know. We do know that material incidentally collected about conversations involving Michael Flynn and others was subsequently leaked, starting in February, in a fashion that was neither ethical nor lawful, and which grossly violated the civil liberties of the people the grand bargain was specifically designed to protect, though we do not know who was responsible for these leaks. Trump is wholly wrong to dismiss the underlying legitimacy of the investigation and to focus only on these leaks. He is not wrong, however, to decry these leaks, which clearly suggest that somebody was indeed engaged in the political misuse of intelligence. That doesn't mean that the collection or reporting was itself inappropriate. But it does create an environment in which the terms of the grand bargain have not been respected by those sworn to defend it. In particular, the damage done by the leaks about Flynn and his contacts with the Russian ambassador, whether by the so-called deep state or former Obama administration officials or whomever, cannot be overstated. Flynn may be a bad actor, or he may just be irresponsible. But these leaks violated the core commitment not to politicize the use of surveillance tools or the fruits of their use. So even if everything the Obama team did in the collection and reporting and unmasking was lawful and legitimate, the combination of the unfortunate and unprecedented context in which officials acted and the bevy of leaks that followed permits whatever it did to be construed uncharitably. It permits lots of people to believe that what happened here was political surveillance or politically motivated surveillance or surveillance of one's political enemies. And this is, of course, exactly what Trump and Nunes are insinuating. Such insinuations, if true, would be a devastating blow to the intelligence community's authority and credibility. But even assuming they are not true, the mere insinuation of politically motivated use of the intelligence services, particularly by the president, for whom the community works, and the House Intelligence Chairman, who was one of the 4 key congressional validators of the, it says priority, I wonder whether they meant propriety, but they say priority and legality of its conduct. And I'll start that one again by the mere insinuation of politically motivated use of the intelligence services, particularly by the president for whom the community works, and the House Intelligence Chairman, who's one of the 4 key congressional validators of its conduct, harms the legitimacy of the community and its use of FISA. It muddles questions about legitimate surveillance with allegations of politically motivated surveillance, which is the great evil the post-1970s reforms sought to eradicate. But of course, Trump did more than merely insinuate. He alleged, and he did so in inflammatory terms. His tweets on March 4th boldly claimed that Obama illegally surveilled Trump Tower, and an endless stream of claims followed about politically motivated surveillance of Trump during the election. The allegations continued even to yesterday, which is, of course, a few days ago, with Trump tweeting on April 3rd, Fox News, from multiple sources, there was electronic surveillance of Trump and people close to Trump. This is unprecedented. That's what the tweet says. The political strategy here is laid out candidly in this generally tendentious essay yesterday, back whenever, by Andrew Klavan, entitled Obama Spied, Media Lied, which makes clear the ambition to change the subject from Russia's intervention to one of the political misuse of the intelligence apparatus. Writes Klavan, once you wave away all the smoke created by our dishonest media, the story of this past week was pretty simple. The Trump-Russia conspiracy narrative is falling apart. The Obama spied on his political opposition narrative is coming together. The media has given credence to Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff's hysterical charges about how the Republican chair of the committee, Devin Nunes, made his latest discoveries. But Schiff is a dishonest McCarthyite, spewing insinuations and accusations without any proof to back them up. Nunes, on the other hand, has obviously gotten hold of solid intel showing that Obama spied on Trump and his people, pretty much as the president tweeted back on March 4th. The willing Democrat executioners of truth, i.e. the news staffs at ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and the New York Times, give equal weight to the statements of both men, making it seem like the House Intelligence Committee has simply descended into partisan bickering. But that's a lie. Nunes has found something. Schiff is smearing him and the president. Those two actions do not deserve the same sort of coverage. Familiar sounding, but backwards. We won't pause to point out the untruths here. You and I probably should, but they won't. Beyond the obvious one, that this developing narrative, even if true, is not at all pretty much as the president tweeted back on March 4th. It would likely do little good in trying to defeat this false narrative to point out that if the intelligence community had been in any way targeting the Trump team for the last year for collection, that should be bad news for the Trump team, since it would imply, in normal circumstances, wrongdoing. Indeed, the whole point of the narrative appears to be to discredit the Russia investigation, or some elements of it, by shifting the story away from Trump connections to Russian wrongdoing over to alleged wrongdoing in the investigation of the Russia matter. This appears to be Trump's larger aim, to muddle the legitimacy of the intelligence community and of FISA as a tool in this context, all with the aim of delegitimizing the Russia investigation and perhaps of delegitimizing broader internal executive branch checks on the presidency. And that is what makes the current situation so dangerous. That in defining his own situation, Trump is attacking the entire structure of legitimacy of the intelligence community. The whole intelligence collection system, which has an importance that far transcends its undoubtedly large importance in this discrete context, is vulnerable here for the simple reason that the intermixture of politics with the intelligence collection is the intelligence system's Achilles heel. Once surveillance is seen through a domestic political lens with domestic political winners and losers, it has a very hard time acting with needed public credibility. Making the situation all the more dangerous is the fact that the FBI is investigating the president's team. A fraught endeavor in any context, but one here made all the more fraught because of the Russia angle and the secrecy that necessarily requires. The damage this episode threatens to the grand bargain is among the most serious, harmful, and potentially permanent institutional threats that Trump, helped ironically by his bureaucratic antagonists responsible for the leaking of the Flynn materials, is capable of bringing about. There is a crying need for credibility here, for an institution that can sort out truth from fiction in a way that the American people, or at least large chunks of it, can have confidence in. What the country needs is an institution that can establish credibly at least the following: the connections, or not, between all of Trump's team and the Russian interference in the election, and the legitimacy, or not, of whether investigative steps were taken before the election and during the transition, including any use of surveillance techniques with respect to the Trump team and the Russian interference. The first hope for credibility here is the FBI. Whatever anyone else might think, whatever else one might think, I guess I should read it properly, whatever else one might think about Comey, he has certainly not acted in a manner that reflects any sort of political bias against Trump. This gives him cover, along with his other indicia of independence, to reach the truth on Russia and the Trump team. In addition, Comey remains a credible voice on Capitol Hill with many Republicans, which is important. If results vindicating the prior administration or implicating people close to Trump are going to stand for something, having an authoritative investigator with credibility among Republicans will be key. But an FBI investigation has limits. It generally exists not to publicly report on its findings. If it doesn't bring a criminal case, particularly in the national security context, it may produce very little public information. And any information it might reveal, if it brings a case, would likely be selective. This is why the congressional investigative side is so important, and the collapse of bipartisanship on the House side is so upsetting. The key here is to have credible bipartisan voices to authenticate Comey's judgments and to discern and confirm the facts where he does not report them. We need voices who can look at the evidence and call it like they see it, even when it goes contrary to political interest. Good luck with that. In Washington, after all, actions contrary to political interest are always the most credible and often the only credible actions. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, and other Republicans who acknowledged the evidence of Russian hacking and contradicted the president on it played a hugely important role in a few months ago, and today, likewise, only or primarily Republicans can remove the sting of the president's charge that the Russia investigation is baseless or biased against him. And only, or primarily, Democrats can speak with credibility if it turns out that some of the investigative techniques used in the Russia matter were, as the president has charged, inappropriate, or if it turns out that it was the Obama administration officials who leaked FISA materials. It is also why the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation is so important, and why its actions to date are so reassuring. At an extraordinary joint appearance with Senator Warner last week, Republican Senator Richard Burr, who chairs the Senate Intelligence Committee, pledged, quote, "We are aggressively going to continue the oversight responsibilities of the committee as it relates to not only the Russian government in the 2016 election, but also to any contacts by any campaign individuals that might have happened with Russian government officials," unquote. And even more importantly, ranking Democrat Senator Mark Warner, standing aside Burr, vouched for him and the committee, saying that, quote, "We are working together very cooperatively," unquote, to get to the bottom of Russia's interference, and that he and Burr trust each other and their fellow committee members to get to the bottom of the matter. The Senate Intelligence Committee shows every indication of doing a credible investigation. The initial hearing last week was extraordinarily impressive in its seriousness. One of us has urged the creation of a select committee, and only time will tell if this investigation proves adequate for the long haul or whether it proves a transitional step along the way to a different investigative structure. But it is, at a minimum, performing an enormously important service right now. Don't underestimate what's at stake here. I don't think any of you are, but don't underestimate what's at stake here, which is not just the fate of the Trump presidency. What's at stake is the entire structure of legitimacy we have built for the intelligence community in the post-Watergate era. And they really do mean we here, and not you and I. They mean we as in them. But, okay, I get their point. Because if the president and the House Intelligence Committee chairman can discredit an investigation of foreign interference in an American election and collusion with that effort by the president's campaign by alleging improper political misuse of the intelligence authorities by the prior administration, if leaking FISA intercepts is an accepted way to go after a political opponent, or go anywhere for that matter. And if nobody can credibly say who's telling the truth and who's lying, what's fake news and what isn't, I guess, then the grand bargain has truly failed, with consequences that are hard to fathom, to say the least. Okay, so now who's ready for a curveball? Let's go back to Trump, but with a little bit of a twist. Let's say this one, Parleo. We'll say this one's for you. Here's one I haven't seen discussed anywhere. And I'm not sure why, except for the fact that it involves yet another foreign country. And it's reported from that country's perspective, but in a language we can understand, English. It is from Spain, the newspaper El País, but El País in English, helpfully enough. A piece by Jose Maria Irujo and John Carlin, also on the byline on this one. And there's some interesting notes at the bottom about who else helped with the report. The Spanish connection with Trump's Russia scandal. And I don't know whether the journalistic tradition in Spain is just a little bit different. It's certainly, the English is a little off. I mean, it's good stuff, and it's meant to be written in English, so it's not just a poor translation or anything like that. It's just, you can tell that there's a little foreign color to the expression. It's otherwise very good, but the more serious issue with this is the story that it tells is nuts, and I guess that we just at this point we should no longer be surprised that American journalists just don't go there with stuff like this. And I don't know whether Spanish journalists can and have protections, or whether they just have rock solid evidence, or whether they all get thrown in jail eventually, or what. But this is some kind of story, and in addition to being bold about things, I mean, from my initial skimming of this, I mean, maybe I'll be disappointed by the end. I hope not, because that'd be a hell of a way to end the show. But I'm also surprised at how clearly this lays out. It doesn't clear anything up, but it lays out very clearly the blurred lines that make the Russia connection so dangerous, and that makes the Russian government so dangerous. The blurred lines between officialdom and private enterprise and criminal enterprise. And that you can move more or less seamlessly from one to the other, if the allegations here are to be believed. The Spanish connection with Trump's Russia scandal is subtitled Alexander Torshin, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Russia. Say that again. Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Russia. And investigated in Spain for money laundering, has infiltrated the U.S. president's circle. If you're, of course, a Russian money launderer, not hard to infiltrate the Russian or the U.S. president's circle, or the Russian president's circle for that matter. But does this lay it out. Okay, well, let's take a look, see if this lives up to my own hype. On February 1st, Alexander Porfirovich Torshin, I'm not certain about any of that really, but Porfirovich, all right, well, I think I've got that right. Alexander Torshin, 63, a Russian politician and banker who is close to Vladimir Putin and whom the Spanish anti-corruption prosecutor and the civil guard define in their reports as a godfather from a notorious Russian mafia organization. That's a man of a lot of talents. Russian politician, banker, what did they call him here? Deputy governor of the Central Bank of Russia, and mobster godfather. I wear a lot of hats, is what he's saying. And hats are key to this. The Guardia Civil, have you ever seen their hats? Okay. Well, they're kind of odd. But anyway, moving on from there. Alexander Torshin, who does all of this crazy stuff, had in his diary for the next day, February 2nd, an appointment to meet in Washington with the world's most powerful man, Donald Trump, Russian mobster. But for Trump's purposes, deputy director of the Central Bank of Russia. Okay, but still, I know he knows a lot of these guys, but did anybody hear this? Did anybody know that on February 2nd, the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Russia was supposed to meet with President Trump? That would be the sort of thing that you'd think they would deny vehemently. The encounter was due to take place before an official and well-attended breakfast meeting. So it wouldn't be obvious. That's good. Which Torshin attended as the head of a Russian delegation. The meeting was canceled that very night, according to sources from the White House, given the wave of criticism in the U.S. press related to the influence of certain Russian circles in President Trump's power teams. But the information reveals the heights to which this person, who had been investigated by the Spanish authorities, had reached in his rise to the upper echelons of the American leaders' circle. So, first question, does Spain just investigate everybody? Is this a Spanish Inquisition thing? They just are after everyone? Or does there have to be some kind of credible evidence to investigate somebody, particularly somebody who's a Russian dignitary, as a mobster? I don't know. Torshin, who is currently the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Russia, has met with one of the children of the U.S. president, and we know about those people. He has close links with the organization that provided the most money for Trump's election campaign, and in case you don't remember, that's the National Rifle Association. It is weird how many international players they have been connected to right here on the show. I mean, they're the National Rifle Association. They're not international. And he's also attended the aforementioned breakfast that Donald Trump presided over in the White House in February. Was that a prayer breakfast? I don't remember. That's about the time that the prayer breakfast might have taken place. I don't know. They don't describe it that way in this. The high-ranking official from the Central Bank of Russia has long been on the radar of the Spanish public prosecutor and the civil guard. He was on the brink of being arrested in Palma de Mallorca in the summer of 2013 during a meeting with a mafioso who had just been sentenced in Spain, but he didn't turn up to the meeting. A unit consisting of 12 officers was awaiting him at the airport and in a hotel where he was expected to arrive accompanied by other people being investigated in a money laundering ring. The Russian Federation's prosecutor general, aware that Torshin was being investigated, requested information about the case on at least 2 occasions, but received no response from the Spanish authorities, given that the investigation was sealed. His case constitutes another element in the laying of the foundation for the FBI investigation currently being conducted into the influence of the Russian government in the outcome of the U.S. presidential elections last year. The political offensive by Torshin appears to form part of a strategy by the Kremlin aimed at influencing the internal policies of the United States. One of the most spectacular results of this apparent strategy was the mass hack of the internal communications of the campaign of Hillary Clinton, Trump's rival, they helpfully point out, which was made public by WikiLeaks, according to the U.S. intelligence services. Over the last year, a number of trusted allies of Trump have been forced to resign, given their shady contacts with Russia, the most recent, his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, on February 13th. The difference in the case of torsion is that for the first time, a Russian mafia boss, at least one identified as such by the Spanish anti-corruption prosecutor, is within the circle of support of the new President of the United States. As well as being a powerful banker, a leader of President Putin's political party, United Russia, and his trusted ally, and a senator between 2001 and 2015, in addition to being chairman of the upper house of the Russian parliament between May 19th and May 21st, 2011, he is, according to the investigation carried out by the Spanish security forces, also a boss of a notorious criminal organization known as Taganskaya, if I've got that pronunciation anything close to correct. The relationship between Torsion and Alexander Romanov, a big name in Russia, a Russian mafioso based in Palma de Mallorca, is the key. An investigation carried out between 2012 and 2013 by a Palma court and the anti-corruption prosecutors Jose Grinda and Juan Carao into Romanov concluded that Torsion was the boss of a Taganskaya criminal operation which laundered money by buying up hotels in Mallorca. A total of 33 telephone conversations between Torsion and Romanov, to which El País has had access, reveal that the relationship is not purely social, as Torsion claims, but rather based on business. An internal document from the Civil Guard Information Service, dated July of 2013, explains Torsion's central role in the criminal plot. As a consequence of the phone tapping carried out in the aforementioned inquiries, it has been ratified that above Romanov, on a higher hierarchical level, is Alexander Torsion. In the numerous phone conversations and with different contact persons, Alexander Romanov himself recognized his subordination before someone he describes as the godfather or the boss, which in itself is telling when it comes to situating their relationship. I told you the English in this was a little iffy. The Spanish police followed Torsion, but he managed to slip away. 3 judicial and police sources from the investigation have confirmed that Torsion decided not to attend Romanov's birthday party on August 21st, 2013, as planned, because they believe he was warned by the Russian prosecutor that if he stepped onto Spanish soil, he would be arrested. The liaison from the Russian Interior Ministry in Madrid had written a report about the Taganskaya, and we believe that in Russia they put the screws on him. To him? Yes. Well, it says on him. We suspect that it was him who warned Torsion was being investigated in Spain, and that was why he didn't come, a judicial source explains. You get the picture? The case had not been completed, and we could not give out that information, explains another judicial source. Russia also discovered that we were investigating Torsion because Romanov's lawyers told the Russian prosecutor as much in writing, and they complained, saying that they were being persecuted in Spain. The confidential report, which is not to be found in the legal case, points to the connection between the Russian state and the Russian mafia. The criminal organizations from the countries of the East have as their main characteristics the penetration of different state powers, such as politics, which is represented in the case by the figure of the first vice chairman of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, that's a lot of federals, Alexander Porfirovich, Torsion, Alexander Torsion, that guy. The 5-page document entitled, and 4 pages of it are just the word federal, by the way. The 5-page document entitled Alexander Torsion in Operation Diriba, no question about that one, Dirieba, was produced so that the anti-corruption public prosecutor could decide whether or not to charge Torsion with the laundering of more than 14 million euros in the purchase of a hotel in Mallorca, and concludes that both the money and the hotel belonged to the Russian ex-politician. It even claims that the hotel forms part of the inheritance that Torsion wants to leave to his two daughters. Why was Torsion not prosecuted? It made no sense to charge Torsion because Russia does not process letters rogatory, that is, requests for legal assistance from abroad, that we file with that country, and there would have been no practical purpose. It would have delayed the investigation. It would have slowed it down, explains a clearly irritated judicial source. Calling on Russia to arrest him would have been useless because Russia does not cooperate. This summer, there will be a trial in Spain in the Troika case against the Russian mafia in Spain. There are a number of fugitives in Russia, and they won't hand them over to us. We don't have the support of the Russian authorities. The formidable and powerful Taganskaya organization, of which Torsion is allegedly part, is recognized by the U.S. and the EU information and intelligence services, including Europol and the FBI, according to the dossier about Torsion from the Spanish Civil Guard. Its activities include the appropriation of companies using violent or fraudulent methods, bank scams, extortion, and the carrying out of contract killings. The point of entry for Torsion to the upper echelons of U.S. politics was the NRA, which is perhaps the most powerful lobby in the United States. I'm sure foreign people believe that very easily. The NRA invested more than $21 million in Trump's election campaign, more than any other organization. According to the group's official magazine, the NRA proclaimed itself to be the key to the Trump victory. Torsion has managed to become a life member of the NRA. Of course, I think you can do that for $25. So I don't know how meaningful that is. He is also linked to the Russian group The Right to Bear Arms, which was created in 2012 and copies the objectives of the NRA. It is presided over by, ding ding, Maria Butina. Remember her? A young admirer of Putin who has had a meteoric career by Torsion's side and who now resides in Washington. Butina celebrated her birthday with a costume party in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C., not the Capitol building, on November 12th of last year, 4 days after the presidential elections. According to the press in Washington, the main reason for the celebration was the election victory of Donald Trump. Among the guests were a number of the new president's campaign consultants. The first direct contact between Torsion, an honorary member of the Russian pro-arms group, and the NRA took place in May of 2013. Torsion traveled to the annual NRA convention in Houston. He himself wrote about this in an article published 8 months later in the Washington Times, a pro-Trump daily, quite true, whose section editor, David Keene, was president of the NRA and is a friend of Torsion. At that time, Torsion was a Russian senator, but his political career was on the rise. In January of 2015, he was named deputy governor of the Central Bank of Russia, and one of his first measures was to designate Butina personal executive assistant. Some months later, on December 11, 2015, the pro-arms group presided over by Butina invited a delegation from the NRA, nearly all Trump acolytes, to an event in Moscow. Torsion gave the welcome speech. In May of 2016, in the midst of the U.S. electoral campaign, Torsion traveled once more to the NRA convention, which was celebrated this time in Louisville, Kentucky. Trump, who was by that point the de facto Republican candidate for the presidency, attended the annual event run by his main benefactors. While there, Torsion had fleeting contact with the future president, who only went so far as to shake his hand. With his son, Donald Trump Jr., things went further. He sat by his side during a private dinner in a restaurant in Kentucky. The rise of Torsion in the upper circles of the United States continued to progress. When Trump, a self-declared admirer of Putin, arrived in office, Torsion was invited to an official breakfast at the White House scheduled for February 2nd, along with other guests. The event was later to be remembered thanks to Trump's jibes aimed at Arnold Schwarzenegger. Torsion traveled there as the head of a Russian delegation. think this is the prayer breakfast. Together with the invitation, Torshin received a proposal for a meeting with the president just before the breakfast, according to Yahoo News, which contributed to this article. The meeting was suddenly canceled. The reason, according to sources from the White House, was the rumors and suspicions about which all of Washington is now talking, the links between Trump's political team and Moscow. The White House gave no official explanation for the cancellation. Maria Butina, who attended gala dinners to celebrate Trump's inauguration, confirmed to Yahoo News in an email that the notification of the cancellation of the meeting between her boss and the president arrived the night before the breakfast. During that visit to Washington, Torshin did have dinner with 2 Republican congressmen. The date was February 1st, and it was in a French restaurant, according to an article published in Time magazine earlier in March, and at which Maria Butina and a close friend of Trump White House strategist Steve Bannon were also present. A close friend of Bannon's, eh? The apparent mission by Torshin to infiltrate the highest spheres of power worked, and the Russian connection continues to create intrigue in Washington. As the veteran columnist Thomas Friedman wrote last month in the New York Times, the biggest national security question staring us in the face today: what is going on between Donald Trump and the Russians? After the investigation by the Spanish judicial authorities and the police into the banker, politician, and mafia godfather Alexander Torshin, there are more unanswered questions today and more scandals in Washington to be investigated. That's the conclusion of the article. Leaves me hanging a little bit. But by the way, I just wanted to note down at the bottom when they said that the Yahoo News had contributed to the reporting in this article, they mean Mike Isikoff from the Yahoo News in Washington is contributing to the reporting in this article. All right, cancel the noise, please. Thank you very much. Is there no way of turning this goddamn thing off? All right. Well, man, that was a weird story, and I don't even know what to make of what its conclusions were. It was very interesting. They jumped immediately on the basis of the conclusions from Spanish judicial authorities to the notion that this guy just simply was a mafioso. In addition to being deputy director of the Central Bank of Russia and I guess a higher up in Putin's party, plus a senator and all these. It's amazing that you can just say all these things. He's a senator, directs the central bank, and he's a mafioso. But lots of familiarities in that story, too. The money laundering methods, buying up real estate out of the country, weird connection to Maria Butina, the NRA again. I still haven't gotten my head around the NRA as a conduit for this group of international mafiosi moving from out of Russia and into the United States, but I guess that's covering, and I guess it's easy enough considering that you can become a lifetime member for $25. I don't know whether all this holds up. I just think it's strange that it's being reported in other countries, it's being prosecuted in other countries. We may in the end have to rely on other countries to handle this investigation for us, which is going to create even more amazing and ridiculous problems for us, for our politics, for our grand bargain, for everyone. I don't know. It seemed like an appropriate conclusion to a really weird start of the week.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you for listening. No doubt the guys on the after show will bring you up to speed on the current stories of the day, depending on who we may or may not have bombed over the weekend, and what Donald Trump did in conducting himself down in Mar-a-Lago with the Chinese president. I just wanted to put that stuff on the record for you. I'll be seeing you live tomorrow.